So today I want to continue with some more fabric collage, or actually it would be like some fibers collage. Continuing a little bit with the idea from this particular piece that I've done in a previous video. I'm not going to go in as depth to the whole technique because you can look at the video for this one, but I wanted to look at some other alternatives to this. Basically because this was done with fabric trimmings, right? But then, every now and then, I go through these snippets. This is like snippets, I think, from some paper piecing projects, and then some threads thrown in from when I'm trimming things at the sewing machine. And then obviously I think we all tend to have little pieces of thread from when we're sewing it, when we're at the sewing machine, and I usually throw this out, but I thought, well, it would be kind of fun to try something with this too. And then the other thing, I like to knit and crochet also, so I have quite a few yarn snippets from different knitting and crochet projects, and this is mainly the thicker yarns. But then I also have some thinner yarns. So I'm thinking it would be really fun to do some new fabric with some of these snippets, I guess, if you want. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, I think that with some of these thicker yarns, I'm going to do the exact same technique as I did here. So I won't go, once again, into depth. I mean, you can look at the video on this type of collage, but using the yarns. So I will use the water-soluble stabilizer in the same way that I did for this piece, but just using the yarns on this one. Then for the threads, I'm going to once again use just a little piece of muslin. Okay. Because I was thinking that this would be kind of fun if it's thin enough to use even for some applique pieces. So in this case, it's the same idea as for the trimmings, but just cover a piece with all these threads. And they will be held, because see, they even kind of knot up a little bit, so okay. But here, instead of using the water-soluble stabilizer, what I'm going to use here is probably a piece of organza. And I just remember I used to do this years ago. I don't know why I hadn't done it lately. I just use it on snippets of fabric, but I never considered doing this with thread. Okay, so when it comes to organza, there's different types and colors. So what you probably want to do is kind of audition different ones. This is a gray, that will tone it down a bit. Okay. So just like experiment with different organzas and see what you like. It's kind of green. So what I would do is just audition. This one's kind of nice. Audition until I come up with the organza that I would like to use. Then you also have organza that's like textured. That might be kind of interesting to use something like this. It all depends on the effect that you want, you know? So I would just say, you know, this is a time to play around, experiment, and see what you like. So in this case, I think I've decided I'm going to go with this piece of yellow organza, and I will do the same thing as I did with this collage, and just kind of free motion, quilt all over it, and just see how it turns out. That's for this, for the threads. Then when it comes to the yarn, I'm going to do the same thing, but in this case, I'm going to put this on a base, some very, very thin fabric. People give me all kinds of fabric because they think that I use it, and this cannot be used in quilting per se, but I find that it can be used as backing fabric, often for small pieces. So I'm going to do the same thing but in this case, I will also use it for the yarns. And it's okay then here for me to let little pieces of the fabric show through, but I'm going to use the exact same thing. And I'm just going to use a piece of organza. In this case, I'm going to use a gray organza, and then free motion quilt all over it and see how that turns out. And then finally, the last alternative, if you don't want to use organza, is also to use tulle. This is another some piece of fabric was given to me. It's very thin. And I think I'm going to mix these snippets. See? And the reason why I would not use the fabric, the stabilizer here, the soluble stabilizer, is because they're so small that I know that things are going to fall out, because you would have to quilt this pretty tightly to be able to catch all of these little snippets in. And I think I'll combine it with some of these thinner ones. We'll see how that turns out. But in this case, the other alternative, since I really want the colors to show through, I would cover this with tulle instead. And you can see that here the colors really will show through a lot better. So I'm going to start with just the basic covering all of these different pieces, layering them and getting them ready to quilt on them to hold all the pieces in. And then the other thing that I wanted to in these pieces explore a little bit of additional embellishment beyond just simply the finished piece like this one, but what to do when you have a bigger piece like this to add embellishments to it. So let's get started on this and see what we come up with. Okay, so let's look at the finished pieces. We'll start with this one. This was the thicker yarn bits, and using the water-soluble stabilizer in the same way that we've done this one. So once again, if you need a step-by-step, you can go look at this a tutorial on a Fabric Collage. I think it's called Fabric Collage 2. So that was the same method using this, and you can see it looks almost like a rug, very tactile. Then the second piece that I prepared was of the little thread bits, and I covered it with yellow organza. In the end, it turned out kind of muddy if you look at just in between, so I added some decorative stitches, but still looked pretty muddy until I decided to couch some threads onto it, and then that made it a lot more interesting. So I kind of like this. It's a small piece. It could be for like a small notebook cover, perhaps. But this clearly, I notice here that if I use colored organza, it does bring down the tones. So the threads that looked bright initially did look a little bit muddy after putting the organza down. And the next piece that I did was, once again with organza, this was a gray organza, and it mutes the colors of the threads a lot. But this one I liked. I used black thread to cover it, to quilt it. And this turned out pretty nice, I think. You know, so you do see the colored threads muted down. So like if we compare to this one, see, this is a lot more muted. Or when you do the stabilizer, because these are a lot of the same yarns. So you can see the difference in the colors, but it's kind of a nice effect. And I really did like using the black thread on this one. So I will post better pictures of each sample at the end of the video. So the next piece was layered with, this is clear organza, and these were the smaller, the thinner yarn scraps. And here I just quilted it in a grid. You can see here that the colors do show through a lot stronger than with the other types of organza. And I really like this because you can really see the threads really clearly. So this will make like a really nice case, I think. And then the last piece was, these were all the really tiny snippets left over from some project. I think this was a paper piecing project. So they were very, very small pieces, and then threads in between, all kinds of little snips of fabric that you would normally throw out, okay? But since I had enough to layer this bigger piece, this for me is an example of what I would do for more muted background. So I think this piece I will definitely be using for the background for a wall hanging, with some brighter applique pieces here. And in this case, what I used was tulle. And this is the tulle, even more than organza, really blends in with the background. You can hardly see it once it's quilted. And so I think that tulle is really what I like the most in order to be able to see the different fibers in the piece. Okay, so to recap, the method with the water-soluble stabilizer and yarns. This is the same yarns, but with gray organza and black quilting. Clear organza, and just a grid pattern in the quilting. The threads with yellow organza, decorative stitching, and couching, which made this piece a lot more interesting than if I had just done something like this. It would have been very muddy, but adding these extra elements really helps this piece. And then finally, I think my favorite here is with the tulle, so you can really see the different fabrics and the different fibers here, if that is what you want to do. And if what you want to do is make a piece like this that can serve as a background for like an applique design. And something that I remembered was that when I still have a couple of pieces when I first started making Fabric Collage that I would like to share. So this is one of my favorite pieces. It hangs in my sewing studio. So here, what I did was, there are just snippets of fabric. You can see like these little red pieces, and then just a few pieces of yarn through and some threads. And this was covered with gray organza and quilted. So it's a very muted kind of background. you have to really look close up to be able to see the different fibers there. And then I applique the design on top. And then another piece that I made a few years back is this one, where these are strips. You can see, I think get a little bit easier, these are strips of fabric laid down, some yarn, and the other thing that you'd have to look at this really close up, but there are some pieces of satin ribbon that go through in different parts here. So once again, this is a good idea if you have not just like threads, I mean not snippets of fabric, but threads, yarns, ribbons, any kind of trimmings where you have like short pieces left over from the project that you really don't know what to use them in. You can always incorporate them into a fabric collage of this type. In this case, what I did was I just ran some decorative stitching down each strip to hold the pieces in place. But this one was also done on top of batting, so it helped quilt the whole piece. And then I added the applique, after having quilted the background, I added the applique design. So there are a few more ideas for you to play around with. I hope that all of these ideas are helpful for you. I thank you for watching.